Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Workforce Workplace Disability Summit 2020. Diversity Includes Disability. My name is Jason Hartsfield, and I'm Adult Career Services Coordinator with Starclough Disability Institute. On behalf of our board and staff, I want to thank you for joining us for the second session of our four-part series to celebrate National Disability Employment Awareness Month. Before we dive in, I want to go over a few of the technical aspects of this event. This webinar is being recorded and will be updated to our YouTube channel following the session. Please note that captioning and interpreting services are available throughout this presentation. If you need to access either of these features, please refer to the guide sent via email prior to the event. We will also be actively monitoring the Q&A and chat box, so please don't hesitate to ask your questions as they arise. If you see a question from someone else that you would also like to be answered, give it an upvote and we will prioritize it for our Q&A portion of the presentation. We want to thank our partners at the Society for Human Resource Management of Greater St. Louis for co-sponsoring this event series. Each webinar is worth 1.25 CEUs for a total of 5 at the completion of this series. A special welcome to all our SHRM members joining us today. Starclough Disability Institute is dedicated to the full participation of people with disabilities in all aspects of society, and especially the workforce. We help break down the barriers that prevent people with disabilities from achieving their highest potential in the workforce and give employers the tools they need to create an environment that attracts, welcomes, and supports this talented and innovative community. The Workforce Workplace Disability Summit is the only place where employers can find reliable best practices on disability in the workplace provided by professionals with disabilities themselves. Today we continue our series with the topic, Building a Culture of Inclusion, a case study of how inclusive cultures promote workplace resiliency in times of crisis. We will be joined by members of the SDI leadership and staff to discuss how our organization's commitment to an inclusive workplace contributed to our success following the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. I am joined today by Lori Becker, the Chief Operating Officer at Starclough Disability Institute. Lori and I are both graduates of the Starclough Career Academy, and Lori has been the Chief Operating Officer for Starclough since 2013. As mentioned, our operating thesis for today is that inclusive organizations contribute to organizational resiliency. But what is organizational culture? According to the Society of Human Resource Management, an organization's culture defines the proper way to behave within the organization. This culture consists of shared beliefs and values established by leaders and then communicated and reinforced through various methods, ultimately shaping employee perceptions, behaviors, and understandings. SHRM goes on to say, organizational culture sets the context for everything an enterprise does. Culture is the difference maker. According to James L. Heskett of the Harvard Business School, culture can account for 20 to 30% of the differential in corporate performance when compared with culturally unremarkable competitors. In addition, according to a 2018 study by Glassdoor, 46% of job seekers cite company culture as very important when choosing to apply to a company. Strong organizational cultures win top talent. Your employees are your brand ambassadors. The more talented they are, the better. Even more importantly today, talented employees are better able to respond to crises in innovative ways. These people want to work for a company that shares their values and will invest in them. So how do you know if you have what they are looking for? Ask yourself, what percentage of the job offers you make to highly talented companies get accepted? When talented candidates say yes, what percentage mention your identity, culture, or brand as a deciding factor? I can tell you that Starclough Disability Institute certainly had to lean on our talent in March of this year. At the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, we faced many of the same challenges most organizations faced. First and foremost, we needed to secure the safety of our staff and those receiving our services. Second, we needed to ensure financial stability. We needed to keep being able to pay the bills. Finally, we needed to find a way to continue moving forward with our mission because we weren't content to just sit and try and wait it out. 7 months later, we've been able to accomplish a great deal despite the pandemic. We've successfully transitioned many of our programs to a virtual setting, including our Dream Big Summer Career Camp, our Career Academy Capstone course, our Party to the Max annual fundraiser, and the Workforce Workplace Disability Summit. We were also able to launch a series of webinars on a variety of topics, both for job seekers and for employers. Ultimately, we've actually been able to expand our impact and are now providing services to job seekers in places like California, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Georgia, and even Canada. And I actually have a phone call scheduled for Friday with someone in Namibia, Africa. So what was it about our workplace culture that allowed us to weather this storm? Well, the best people to answer that question are SDI'S own staff. So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce Blair Damerman, our Youth Program Manager, Brian Chow, our Chief Financial Officer, Dallas Adams, our Communications Manager, Danielle Giffrida, our Dream Big Camp Coordinator, Katie Fields, our College Outreach Coordinator, and Susan Manhard, the Director of the Starclough Career Academy. And thank you all for joining us. Let everybody pop into the room real quick. So the big question on the table is, what aspects of SDI'S culture do you feel allowed us to maintain high productivity and employee satisfaction in these challenging times? And we'll start with Blair.
So one thing that I feel has helped with productivity is our leadership's encouragement as a sense of community. So through things like virtual happy hours and social distancing patio hangs, we've been able to stay connected throughout the pandemic. Being encouraged to connect and socialize with each other about our lives outside of work also allows for a sense of belonging and community that positively affects the work that we do with our candidates and also within the community. I moved to St. Louis and started with Starclough in January, and shortly thereafter we transitioned into a remote workplace. Of course, this wasn't ideal, but there's never been a time where I haven't felt supported, there hasn't been a time where I've felt unsupported or alone or outcast, and I attribute that to my Starclough family and our leadership's emphasis on community.
Thanks, Blair. Brian.
Great talking with you all today. I personally believe that one of the things that helped us maintain productivity and employee satisfaction during this kind of crazy time in our life is that with nearly 80% of our employees being people with disabilities, and then obviously working with people with disabilities ourselves, people with disabilities are natural problem solvers. We run into a lot of different situations because of our various special needs and whatnot. And so we are very used to adapting to different sets of circumstances, really kind of all the time throughout the day. So I think we were well equipped just naturally for that sort of situation that we got put in with the pandemic, and it really allowed us to step into, do whatever we needed to do very well. I think we also invested in the technology pretty quickly that we needed to facilitate the communication that kind of changed from being in the office to all of a sudden being remote. Fortunately, we had already made those investments just in most people in the company already being able to work remotely with their computers and whatnot, switch to laptops or bring people's desktops home if they needed to, but then also quickly adapting to incorporate Zoom across the organization so that we didn't just have to talk over the phone, but we could see each other, because I think that had a big impact as we could all see. So,
thanks, Brian. Dallas, what do you think helped us be successful?
So more on the personable side, at the beginning of the pandemic, as we're all kind of in fear over this virus that could potentially harm us, harm our coworkers, especially as we have some immunocompromised people on staff. Another situation kind of reared its ugly head back up, and that is, the problem of prejudice, racism, and bigotry. And as we navigated the pandemic and then were confronted with the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, the list goes on, and has not stopped since the pandemic or before. As a Black woman coming to work every day, especially being isolated from my coworkers and kind of having to sit with the news every day, it took a toll on my mental health. And part of my success in remaining productive, highly productive during this time, is attributed to my leadership's ability to, one, recognize that this is something that impacts me and all of us personally, and also that it could have some sort of mental implications that would come in front of work. Because even though you're supposed to come to work and kind of have a blank slate and you're supposed to leave personal things outside and at home, the fear of the pandemic plus the fear of just the fact that I could walk outside, or that, my child could walk outside and be in a situation where they could be in danger because of somebody's false perceptions of who we are, I was able to express that in a clear and open way, and be able to also admit when the day maybe felt too heavy and I needed to take an extra hour just to reset and come back to work with a fresh mind.
Great. I'm glad you felt that way. Thank you, Dallas. Danielle.
Yeah, so the leadership and how I coped with transitioning into home was very, very helpful, and everything went down great. But like if I had issues or concerns, like I knew I can call on the leadership team and ask for their advice, and they would get to me right away, and there was like no problems or concerns with any issues that I've had transitioning back to the staying at home.
Okay. Thank you, Danielle. Katie.
Yeah, so one aspect of our culture that I think allowed us to maintain high productivity and employee satisfaction during this really wild time really was, I think, the level of flexibility we were granted as employees. When the switch had to happen, our leadership was super quick to adapt and made sure we had everything we needed as employees to be successful. And then we were really given the flexibility as a staff to figure out how to make working from home the best experience possible for ourselves. We were given the freedom to explore working from home, and never were told how we had to conduct our remote responsibilities, because our leadership really trusted us as employees to just get our work done in the way that we thought was best for ourselves. And for me, I think that level of flexibility allowed me to really settle into the remote setting with more ease than I expected, and it made it a lot easier for me to focus on my responsibilities soon after that transition happened.
Okay. Thank you, Katie. And then Susan, what do you feel helped us be successful? Looks like you're still muted, Susan. Well, I know Susan is going to need some assistance getting unmuted. While she's doing that, I'm going to go on to the next question, and then as soon as Susan's unmuted, we'll invite her back to share what she felt helped her be successful. We had a great question come in. Oh, there you are. Wonderful. Thank you, Susan.
Oh, I'm not there on my screen. But I can answer. I believe that I want to piggyback off of what Katie contributed, and that would be the trust that they have that that we'll do our best and get the work done, and not use remote operation as an excuse. There's no camera tracking if I'm in place and at the computer. There's no checklist that I have to turn in, or something to prove that I'm working. And I think it's the leadership that helps me feel respected as an employee, and knowing that they can trust me, that just really makes it even better. And I want to add that I think it's their leadership. They teach us by example to respect ourselves, and also to embrace the diversity among us and among the community.
Thanks, Susan. That really goes to show what Sherm was saying, that the cultures and norms of an organization are set from the top. Hello, puppy. We had a great question come in from one of our prior to the event, and it was about the difference between a genuine effort towards inclusion and more of a pandering effort to just look like you're doing the part. So this question's for everybody. What tells you that an organization, StarCloth works with a lot of organizations, what tells you that someone is really taking it seriously versus just paying lip service to the idea of inclusion?
I'd like to take the first leg of this, if y'all don't mind, because I think we saw a lot of pandering, just, to further the point that I was making earlier about cultural and racial inclusion and diversity. We saw a lot of companies kind of come out and put out statements, and we see this a lot with the disability community too. There is a lot of emphasis on words and there's no action. When you look around your workplace, are you being respected? Are you the only person that looks like you in a room? And I know that all of my colleagues can kind of attest to the feeling of being the only person that looks like you or has your disability or understands you in a room. And the way that you are welcomed and received, even by people who may not understand your experience, goes far beyond just an email that says, we see you and we matter and we stand with you. Is your board racially diverse? Does your board have anybody who has a disability? Looking at, other aspects of your leadership team and the people who are looking over people who may be racially diverse and not in leadership positions. So I would say that's one way that you can kind of self-audit if you have made a statement. And we've, at StarCloth, just transparently, we also had to do our own internal self-audit and be able to look in where our gaps were as far as inviting different voices to the table of our programming, and really put some action behind our words too. So it's something I think all of us are going to have to do.
I'll echo Dallas, being around other people or seeing other people in your organization with similar disabilities really makes, that, we're not just paying lip service to our inclusion efforts, especially when it comes to disability. StarCloth is the first place where I worked where there was another person who used a wheelchair, other than myself. But beyond that, I think, there's so many people that have non-visible disabilities. And one of the things here at StarCloth that I feel really good about is that it's not just the visible disabilities that we talk about. I think people with non-visible disabilities, many on our staff, feel very comfortable openly talking about them with each other. And, I think sometimes people with, certain different issues, disabilities, and there's a whole wide variety of them, can feel a little bit, strange talking about one's disability in front of the other, maybe because there's some perception that one is harder than the other. But that's simply not true. Each person's disability affects them uniquely. And I think it's really clear across our organization that we just really respect everybody's disability one way or another. We're really interested in, how that impacts that person, but also how it, also brings kind of a different aspect or, knowledge of their life and whatnot.
Thanks, Brian. Well, I'll say as a person with an invisible disability, I do appreciate the opportunity. I've never been one to not talk about my visual impairment, but other disabilities, mental health issues. It is comfortable working in an environment that the challenges associated with that are acknowledged. This month is mental health awareness month, and I think it's just worth taking the time to acknowledge that. For those of us who work on the service side, we're working with students or we're working with job seekers. You are also connecting a lot to companies. I know that we've noticed some patterns when it comes to who our job seekers want to work for, where do they go? What are you seeing companies doing that makes job seekers with disabilities or students with disabilities excited to work there?
I'd like to tackle this one. Like you said, we work with a lot of really talented, highly competitive internship seekers. That's the population I work with. And more than anything, these students want to work with inclusive organizations that recognize the talents that these individuals bring to the workplace. And I think to make these programs or these workplaces appealing to these individuals, your organization's going to need to highlight their desire to build an inclusive workforce, and they need to bring action to that. So to be more inclusive, are you ensuring that your application process is accessible from front to end? Are you using plain language in your job description? Are you making sure your applicant tracking system is compatible with assistive technology? Are you sharing that accommodations are available throughout the whole application process if they're needed? Your organization needs to know not only how to onboard, but then how to create a culture that welcomes and supports these individuals when they do join the workplace. So do they feel supported? Do they have the tools that they need to succeed? And then representation, I think, is really important. If you want to attract individuals to your organization, especially folks with disabilities, be sure that you are showcasing employees that actually look like them, because that's going to make people more excited to join your organization.
Yeah, I can pick up where Katie left off too. I know, like for Dream Big Camp, our students are able to have access to corporations and get to interact with corporations, and they get to basically have the head companies come in and be like, hey, once you graduate with your degree or certificate after you graduate college, we would be more than happy to have you. And they even show them the type of jobs they have there and what kind of degrees they would need there, and also be able to see some of the people in the environment that look like them and want them to know that they're welcoming there, and want them to apply for those jobs once they get those certifications they need to apply there.
Susan, Blair, anything you'd like to add?
I was going to say exactly what Danielle said.
Okay.
Danielle.
Susan, what are your observations from our adult services side about what makes job seekers with disabilities excited to work for certain companies?
Okay, can you ask that again, Jason?
What are your observations from our adult services things companies are doing that get our job seekers excited to work for them?
I think one thing is just their diversity. I know that we learn a lot from the students, as well as the students learning from us. And we get diverse students in our organization, and I think we really enjoy that. They have some different perspectives, things to contribute, so we actually give them the same respect and encouragement and guidance that our leadership gives us. And I think I learned that from the leadership.
Okay. What about what companies are doing to engage our students? What stands out to you?
The companies are actually embracing, are knowing that they're stepping into or out of their box in a way, and trying to create a real culture of diversity.
Mhm. Yeah, I'll add just the personal commitment that a lot of the people that Susan and I in Adult Services get to work with, the individual recruiters, even the hiring managers and some of the people higher up, we can tell by their energy and by how quickly they get back to us, how often they keep in touch with us, that they are committed. So.
Yeah, Jason, and I'll just echo that for our Dream Big camp and our corporate partners who have internships. They are all very enthusiastic to be a part of what we're doing, and the support and programming we're providing for our students and our adult candidates as well. So that's really helpful as a program staff to be working with corporate partners who are enthusiastic, because it makes your job a little bit easier, but it also makes it more fun to do whenever people are supportive.
I do want to just add one more thing. As a communications and marketing professional, to echo what Katie said about seeing people with disabilities highlighted in your space, you really underestimate the importance of representation until you put yourself in the shoes of someone who is never represented. Something that we take a lot of pride in is that we do not use stock photography at StarCloth. We use real people who use real wheelchairs, like they are real wheelchair users, they are real service animal users, and we encourage our corporate partners to really make a statement about that. If you're redesigning your website to be more accessible, lean into, we've even had corporate partners use some of our people on staff as their models for different projects, but lean into the disability community so that you can have someone there that shows people with disabilities that not only are you welcomed here, you're recognized as being a part of this company. And also there's a lot to say about accessible graphic design, using font choices and color choices that make sense, that are easy for people with low vision to be able to read, having captioners, having live interpreters like we have today, that really invites people with disabilities to look at you, even if they're not actively looking for a job, that they're able to see that they care about people like me, and that makes me respect your brand and respect your company a lot more.
Thanks, Dallas. All right, well, I want to thank you all for joining us for the discussion, and you'll be able to stick around for the Q&A at the end. So thank you. As all of you heard from our staff, there are a number of values our leaders, SDI's leaders, again, emphasizing that it comes from the top, practice that encourage a culture of inclusion. These include flexibility, trust, transparency, collaboration, a sense of community, agility, innovation, and a commitment to inclusion and wellness. What I'd like to do now is hand it over to Lori Becker, who's going to talk to us more about practices that you can use in your workplace to help your culture become more inclusive and therefore more resilient. Lori?
Great, thank you, Jason, and thanks to everybody on the team for joining us today and talking about our culture at SDI and what we have fostered and what has made our culture and our workplace so resilient. And what I'd like to emphasize also is that this culture is intentional, and it is what, and it hasn't been put in place way before a time of crisis hits. And that's, but so when something comes along, whether it's a pandemic or, you know, times of, you know, civil unrest and strife, your team, your organization, your company, your business will be more resilient because you have built a culture that is based on a core set of values, and everyone in your organization knows what those values are, and everyone feels that they belong to this organization. They are committed to your mission and meeting your business objectives. So inclusion and belonging, I want to focus on that for a moment. Inclusion defined is to be comprised as a part of the whole group. And if you have an employee who doesn't feel like they belong in your company, then you're missing out. You're missing out on that person's participation. You know, this is the 30th year of the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, our Civil Rights Act. And when right before George H.W. Bush signed the ADA into law, he said, "Let the shameful walls of exclusion come tumbling down." So that tells you right there that how important the inclusion of people with disabilities is in society. The civil rights movement of the 1960s forgot to include people with disabilities. So we had our own civil rights law that was passed in 1990, and we celebrated this year. And this month we celebrate National Disability Employment Awareness Month. So I think this topic today is so important. And I'm so glad that all of you are joining us here to talk about how to build this culture of inclusion into your organization. Inclusion and belonging in the workplace is so important because it is such a strong human need. Some studies even show that it is a stronger need than food and safety. And if a person, an employee, does not feel that they belong as part of an organization, they are more likely to leave. Some studies show, the study by Gallup and the Harvard Business Review show that an individual who does not have a friend at work, which they equate a friend as being part of belonging, that they are 7 more times likely to leave the company. Let me see what's on. So I want to talk for a moment about how to, excuse me real quick, see where I am. There are 3 best practices, or 3 areas that I'd like to focus on really quickly about how you can begin to build the culture of inclusion in your organization. And that comes down to communicate, educate, and equip. And Dallas mentioned this earlier. Communicating is incredibly important. And this includes including people with images of people with disabilities in your company messaging, and it includes including them on the website, including them in messages from your company leadership, in all throughout, and external communications and internal communications. And ensure people with disabilities are included in your diversity and inclusion policies. About half of Fortune 500 companies, excuse me, Fortune 100 companies do not include people with disabilities in their D&I policies. share the success stories and model success. What do you want good inclusion to, true inclusion to look like in your company, and share those stories. And if you feel like you're having a hard time finding those stories internally, get those external partners. I know so many organizations are working with external partners in the community. Talk to, and organizations like ours, tell those stories in your company, and talk to your employees about how to get involved with these organizations and the good work that you're doing. Just continue to share those stories and leverage that communication. Education is such an important part of building an inclusive culture in your organization. You want to offer targeted trainings to key staff members, especially recruiters and HR managers, meeting planners, and technology staff. You want to build, and then build awareness throughout the entire organization. Leverage months like National Disability Employment Awareness Month with posters and big awareness campaigns and fairs, things of that nature. Social media is very important. Offer a wide range of resources on your website. Also, share stories with your customers and clients. This is really important as well. Contribute to the community and highlight those stories as well. Equip, provide the tools that are necessary for everyone in your organization to succeed. This is incredibly important. Focus on accommodations and whatever work adjustments are necessary to be accessible, including technology, facilities, and the processes. Bring people together in networks to build skills and visibility. A good way to do this is through employee resource groups. And make talent development everybody's business. And this goes to mentoring programs are very great for this, as well as embed some key performance indicators into people's performance reviews. Are you mentoring people? Are you bringing talent up? Are you raising people up in the organization? Provide career coaches for young employees. Bring interns in. Designate internships for people with disabilities. Those are definitely 3 ways that you can start to build the culture of inclusion in your organization. This applies to an organization of 15, 1,500, 15,000, it doesn't matter. These are all things that you can do starting today to build your community. So having said that, we have several questions, really great questions that have been asked, and I would like for the team to come back and join me again so that we can tackle these together. With me? Great. Jason, do you have the first question? Or here, let me see if I can grab it. Here, I've got one. I can do this I'd like to say this really quick. There was a question that came in that says, how do you measure the success of an inclusion effort? And I want to go back, I want to point back to the slide that Jason put up earlier at the very beginning. To measure the success of an inclusion effort, I mean, you can always do, employee satisfaction surveys and things of that nature. But where the rubber meets the road is how many of your job candidates are saying how many people are saying yes to your job offers, and how many diverse candidates are in your applicant pool? Do people of diverse backgrounds want to come and work for your company? That is how you measure really whether or not you are promoting an inclusive culture. Anybody else have anything to add to that?
About how to measure the success. You know, I think one of the points that I like to make when talking to employers is there's a difference between an organizational culture and your personal preference, and making sure that you're hiring people when you're looking at the people you are hiring. You're asking those questions. Does everybody, when I look around the office, does everybody look like me? And what does that say about how I hire? Am I picturing our workplace culture as people that I'm comfortable with, or am I picturing as our missions, our vision, our values? That's an important distinction to make. So I think one of the things you can do to measure the effort of your inclusion, the success of your inclusion efforts, is to look at the raw data of what do your employees look like? You know, for federal contractors, there's just 7% mandate. Centene is saying we want 10% because we want our staff to look like the people that we serve, and that's a dedicated effort. They're measuring that, they're pushing for that, and they're providing the resources. I've had the opportunity to get tours of the intranets, the training for some different companies in the area, and they're being very dedicated to making sure their hiring managers are trained in an interview. Only about 50% of hiring managers are actually taught how to do a job interview, much less taught how to do an inclusive job interview. So part of your measurement might just be making sure that everybody that is in a position of hire is trained and being observed to hire effectively. But ultimately it comes down to, does your staff reflect your community, or does it reflect the people that look exactly like your senior leadership?
Thanks, Jason. Here's a great question. This, I think, would for all of you to answer. What are the best ways to include and engage employees that are still working from home?
I think one of the best ways to keep your employees engaged is to give them the option to engage with each other outside of your typical work meetings. But also, I think that can sometimes backfire, like in larger work environments or with jobs that require you to be on Zoom all the time. Sometimes Zoom fatigue is a real thing, and you have to find the balance between what your company is doing kind of in its waking hours. Are you guys always on Zoom? Is there a way that you guys can get together safely at a park or at somebody's backyard? We have kind of done a mixture of both. We've done virtual happy hours, and we've also done, we've gone to people's patios, we've gone to people's backyards wearing masks and being safe, just to have that kind of human interaction. But I think it's going to take a lot of creativity for companies to really think about what is it that's going to keep people engaged and having that human interaction without requiring or forcing people to show up. Because again, all of these things are also very optional, because we understand that all of our workloads are different, and your mental health can be on burnout mode. And the last thing you want to do is be shamed or discouraged because you don't have the mental capacity to attend your outside happy hour or another Zoom fun, albeit fun, happy hour.
I would also say, especially as Dallas kind of communicated, we're going into the winter months and it's going to be more difficult to do those, outdoor gatherings and whatnot. I think you want to just stay conscious of your employees that are still working from home, which I think probably will be the majority. But, if you have employees that are in the office, make sure you're still chatting with your employees that are remote. Make sure that you're checking in, seeing how they're doing, even more than you might do otherwise. It is easy to feel isolated. And just to make sure that, they know that they're being thought of and, remembered and whatnot, I think is an important thing to do. And I know, as an employee working from home and whatnot, and we have a lot of trust in our employees, we give them a lot of leeway, but it's easy to feel lost and whatnot. So just constant check-in and whatnot, not overbearing, but checking in is going to be really key.
And I'll just add a little more to that. I think, out of sight, out of mind sometimes. And so I think to keep engagement going in this virtual space, just keeping in mind, the successes people have that sometimes if they're not in the office, you might not recognize that success and celebrate it. I think we at StarCloth do a really good job of celebrating our successes even when we're apart. And I even think, every month we sing happy birthday to the folks whose birthday it is, and it sounds terrible over Zoom, just awful. But, it shows that, oh, we remembered you, and we're here to celebrate you. And so I think even if it's done in that virtual space, the fact that it's done just shows, that your team cares.
I'll add that we've done a good, as Dallas said earlier, Brian said earlier, we've invested in communication technology. We've always been sort of a tech savvy organization, but we're now pretty frequently using GChat and Google Docs in addition to Zoom. Because when I think about it, I think like we're already primarily communicating with each other through emails, and what we miss is just seeing each other around the office, and those little, hey, I'm going to pop into your office and ask you a question. We don't have to schedule a Zoom meeting for that. You can just ask that question in GChat. And patience is a good part of it too, because we're in different spaces. We're not all in the same space. So I think for myself, at least, adding a layer of patience, I'm going to ask my question, then I'm going to go on to another thing until that question is answered, because I don't know what that person is doing. So we have another question that came in. How do you keep inclusion at a constant or priority in your organization? So how do you keep your inclusion efforts a priority? I think that's especially important in times like right now when they can be kind of put on the back burner.
I think we talk about it. I mean, we continue to talk about it. We were talking about it before the COVID, and we continue to talk about it all the time amongst ourselves and in social media. I think some of us continue to talk about it.
I would like to say that, hopefully you can, hopefully you have an ERG that has, or a group of individuals that are really committed to inclusion in your organization, and that you have a voice at the table. Recognize the way inclusion is impacting your business, and then tie it to some performance metrics. I think that's really, really important. Also, if your organization is a size that will allow it to do this, hire a person who's dedicated to it. Make it the law. That's the way that things stay permanent, right? Is that if it is embedded in every aspect of the organization, that's how it stays relevant, and that's how it stays included. It's like you know, baking a cake and it's eggs, it holds everything together, you know. So I think that's how it has to be part of the organization. And sometimes it just starts with a very small group of committed people to get that change started. We had another question that came in through the chat that I'd like to ask. And it says, what are some actions that current teams can take to make sure that employees are comfortable, seen, heard, and supported, and to lay the groundwork, to lay the groundwork for a shift for greater inclusion of new employees. So I think we're looking for what can current teams do to lay the groundwork that will attract new employees and ensure that they are comfortable, seen, and heard and supported.
I can start. I have an idea. So one of the things, if you don't have an employee ERG, that doesn't mean you don't have like-minded employees in your office. So kind of looking at this scenario where it's really just people in their everyday workplace saying, I want to see this change. Find other people who want to see this change. Talk to your coworkers. Your leaders will listen to you if you come together as a group and say, this is important to us. This is something that we want to see at this organization. That can lead to an ERG. An ERG can then lead to formal policies. It can lead to increased hiring. So the best thing you can do is to start getting together with people, with like-minded people who want to see these changes.
I also think part of that conversation, trying to figure out what your policies are means having to look for and audit what is currently happening and looking for those gaps. So if where your attention goes, energy flows. So you have to really put your attention on what are the gaps that are missing here on our team. Are there other voices that we could be adding to this conversation? And then another thing that I think that we don't think about so much, and it goes to a point that Brian made earlier, is that there are likely people already who kind of already are diverse. And especially when we're talking about disability, there may be people who have non-visible disabilities that just have not personally disclosed them to you. And by taking the courage to stand up in your conversation and say, hey, I'm noticing that we're missing these gaps in our talent, or that we don't have a whole lot of human-based conversations about how you feel or how our words and policies kind of shape the way that you work here. By just opening yourself up to the possibility that there are already people that fit those diversity needs that you just haven't discovered yet. And that goes again to the point of just looking for those gaps and really using your attention to dream up what a diverse team looks like for you. So an audit, that'd be the first thing I'd suggest.
Mm-hmm.
To add to that, one thing that I tell employers to do, just for attracting disability talent into your workforce, is to actively put on your careers page or on your website about, we want to hire employees with disabilities, disability inclusion. That'll get you attention from the public, people with disabilities looking for jobs, but also it will make sure that your current workforce, and especially those people with hidden disabilities, know that you are actively and proud to include disability in your workplace. And that all of a sudden can really start a whole conversation and really just build upon your culture. So I think just trying to make that public, and one place that's easy to do that is on your careers page on your website.
Thanks, Brian. I think that's a really great point. And it does for those companies that are, trying to reach an inclusion goal of people with disabilities in their workforce, and are asking people to identify. I think that's another marker of an inclusive culture, is do people feel comfortable saying, yes, I am a person with a disability in this company. I may have worked here for 15 years, but until this year, when this company had this campaign that, that they started posting images of people, or they sent messages from the company leadership, that I finally felt comfortable saying, okay, I'm okay. I will be supported. I will not, be persecuted or looked down upon, or, scrutinized if I identify as a person with a disability. I think when you shift that culture, when the narrative changes, you will see your numbers of individuals already in your company identifying.
I just
I'll pipe in one. I'm sorry, Blair, but pipe in one more time on that. I have a very visible disability. I have muscular dystrophy, and I use a power wheelchair. I have all of my adult life. Before I worked for Starclough Disability Institute, whenever you kind of join a company and you have to fill out your demographic information, and there's that question, do you have a disability? I would never select a yes on that, because I just never really felt like, well, my life isn't all about my disability. That's just one aspect of me. Why do I need to define that publicly here? And, make it even more known. But if I was working for a company, and I think Starclough is one of those, and I think a lot of companies are going this way, that do have a public presence of, we embrace disability and whatnot in our workplace, I would absolutely select that. But I just never really felt that it was needed to be said, because that just wasn't something that was being, touted elsewhere in the organization.
I was just going to add that on the youth program side, being involved in community programs, if the resources are available, that capture young adults with disabilities, is also very important for our for our companies that we work with. Catching that talent pipeline before they get into their education. And then even in internships, I know Lori mentioned, creating those internship opportunities, or maybe having a separate candidate pool of students with disabilities for those internship opportunities. So really getting involved in those community programs that, target our students with disabilities as well.
I'd like to tackle a question that's gotten a couple of upvotes in the Q&A. A lot of times you see people with disabilities, especially people with very visible disabilities, being hired at entry-level positions and then never actually being able to move forward in the company. What do we think is kind of the cause behind this, and what can be done about it? What should companies do about it internally?
I think that goes back to our, what we talked about, equipping individuals and talent development, mentoring individuals is really important. And, there are oftentimes a lack of role models in, for young people with disabilities. It's very difficult to find a person with a visible disability in particular in the C-suite anywhere across the country, across the world. It's like a unicorn. So to even have that as an aspirational goal is difficult. So there's a real importance for companies to nurture that talent, provide mentors, and it's really important actually for the disability community itself to get involved in nurturing that talent, but also do not pigeonhole people with disabilities and think that they, when they're coming into a company, that it is going to be an entry-level position, when oftentimes they have years of experience at a company, years of experience in the world of work, and are highly capable of starting at, at any level of a company. So it is very, it's very difficult. Just because you haven't seen it before doesn't mean it can't happen. Group?
So I just want to, I feel like I've answered every question. I'm sorry that I keep talking. I am a communications person. But something that I really had to kind of confront when I started working at Starcloth, I don't have, at least I don't have any family members who have disclosed that they have disabilities to me. I don't have any friends outside of before I started working at Starcloth, and I come from a corporate background. And when I first started working at Starcloth, I had to confront my own internal biases. And I think this happens a lot with people who don't have a connection to people with disabilities, either personally or professionally, is that you try to solve problems for people with disabilities in your mind that don't exist. Or you try to kind of imagine a person with a disability in your C-suite, to Lori's point, and you start to create problems, or your brain just kind of has this kind of cognitive dissonance, and it is an internal bias that you have to really sit with and confront. When you have a talented applicant in front of you, why is it that your brain automatically is trying to put problems that need to be solved on top of an applicant with a disability versus somebody who doesn't have a visible disability, where you just assume that they can do the job. You assume based on their resume, which you should do with everyone. When they appear qualified, you should assume and trust that they're able to do the job. So I think, as people who are not in the disability community, that's it's difficult sometimes to retrain your brain, but you really have to sit there and retrain your brain and ask yourself, why am I automatically assuming that somebody can't do it because they're a wheelchair user, or because they have to use a service animal? And why am I trying to make excuses to not hire somebody who is clearly talented and qualified enough to do the job and be promoted?
Thanks, Dallas.
I would add to what Dallas is saying. If you look at the way you've got the job laid out and you're thinking about what are the problem, what is the person with a disability going to have a hard time doing, it's also important to take a step back and ask yourself, is the way that I'm looking at this particular task, am I asking them to be able to do this because it is an essential component of completing the task, or am I asking them to do it because it's always the way that we've done it? Classic example, I've had this happen at different organizations with different people. The person's got a visual impairment. We've always used 2 screens for our setup. They can't use 2 screens. Well, then that means they can't do the job. No, it just means that you've always used 2 screens. Talk to that person with a disability. Find out what they're picturing their ability, what they're picturing. They know their software. They know their capabilities. They've done it before. Brian's point too about keeping staff engaged. If you've got someone who's working from home because of transportation or because of health issues, chances are they're already trying to be engaged with other people in their community. So they may have some ideas. You don't have to try and figure it out for that person. You need to ask that person what they have in mind and then work with them to find a solution that gets the task done without so much relying on the process, if that's not as important.
Great. Is there any other questions, Jason, that came up in the chat or prior? I have one from that one of the registrants had asked that I really liked, that I think some of the attendees might appreciate. So they asked for the do nots of inclusion, which I think is always a kind of a fun way to, you know, to learn what not to do. And staff, you guys, I thought of a few ahead of time, but maybe you guys can add to it as well. My first one was do not do nothing, because inclusion won't just happen on its own. You have to be very intentional about the process. Do not assume that you know what other groups need, and want, and feel. You need to include them. Do not exclude them from the process. Include and amplify their voices. Those were my big 3 do nots. Do not do nothing, do not assume, and do not exclude. Those were my big 3 do nots. Anybody else want to say what not to do?
If you're going to do, so first of all, just sweeping, do not do simulation exercises. I'm going to put an asterisk behind that. Simulation exercises where you just try on someone's disability. Here, get in this wheelchair, and now you know how hard it is. A person with a wheelchair knows how to open a door with a wheelchair. They're trained. They've figured it out. You trying it on is not the same experience. So for all the people that ask us, hey, can you come and do a simulation exercise? All right, we're going to teach you how a person with a disability does it. We're going to have someone with a disability come in and show you how they use a wheelchair or how they use a cane. That's far more effective than just putting on a blindfold and pretending to be blind.
It's a great one. Anybody else have any do nots that they want to add? Okay, great. I want to respond to one other comment that came up that said, do you have any like advice for organizations that are not specific to, you know, just a disability organization? And I do want to make the point that although that we do employ a large amount of people with disabilities in our organization, these rules apply to every organization. And I know that because we are experts in our own accommodations and assistive technology and things of that nature, these same basic principles and tenets apply across the board, you know, in terms of, go back to that, know your company values, ensure everyone is included, has a sense of belonging, communicate, educate, and equip. That's what it all goes back to, it really does.
Lori, we have one Q&A that's been voted a couple of times that I think
Sure.
you as our leader, and then Brian too. How do you engage leaders in this conversation? If you're wanting to make these changes and you have to go to your leadership, how do you get them involved and get them to embrace this?
I would ask them if they understand how much this is really impacting the bottom line. When it comes to leaving a significant portion of the talent pool out of the conversation, and not only, you know, the person, you know, as well as a customer base. I mean, how many people with disabilities are in the American population, and how many people are friends with them, and how many family members do they have? It's a very significant portion of the population. And it greatly impacts business. That's my argument. That would be my argument. I think, you know, being the right thing to do sometimes just might not be that appealing to somebody. I don't know. But when you're talking business, I would go in and with that, and be ready to have that conversation about people being able to access our, you know, company website, being able to access our building, and then when you make it everything more accessible for everybody, make it accessible for people with disabilities, it's more accessible for everybody. So, and that applies to your company website, it applies to your physical plant, it applies to your processes, business processes and policies as well. Brian, what do you think?
I echo everything you said. People with disabilities are 25% of the population, at least here in the United States, and they all have dollars to spend. So that can impact your bottom line and can also expand your bottom line.
Talk about, I mean, I think about, Brian, you talk about, Brian and I will go out to a bar or restaurant together. And if it's not someplace that we can get into easily or feel welcomed, you know, we go elsewhere and take a merry band of people spending money along with us, right? And that goes for just about anything, just about any business as well.
I'll say from the job seeker's perspective, Susan and I both know the companies that everyone comes and says they want to work for and the companies that no one is ever going to work for. 25% of the US population means reputations get around. And if you're connected to the disability community, which is a big community, you do get a reputation as an employer, and you want to have that reputation as an employer who's trying to do something, not that reputation of the employer where the hiring managers don't know what they're doing or they're going to discriminate. Every person I've ever worked with, and pretty much everybody I've ever known with a disability, has a tale of employment awkwardness or discrimination or something. And that impacts their career choices, that impacts where they're going to shop, that impacts who they're going to tell people they want to work with and work for. It really does have an impact on your bottom line.
People with disabilities know as soon as they approach a building for a job interview, or even if they, approach a website, whether or not they're going to feel included or be included. It can be in as much as if I use my white cane when I'm going into a new, the lobby of a big building, which can be very intimidating sometimes, whether or not that frontline staff has had some training on how to be helpful and welcoming and assist, whether it be a person who is blind or low vision, or a person who uses a wheelchair, or a person who is deaf, that they just have had some training and know how to interact in a normal, polite, and respectful way. And so that education that your company has decided to provide to that frontline person to just be a welcoming presence when anybody walks through their front door makes a difference. That's going to send the signal to anybody, whether it be a customer or a job applicant, that, hey, they've taken the time to understand me and my needs and make me feel like I'm going to be welcomed here. So that's a really positive sign. And that can be blown in an instant. And then, as Jason said, that reputation gets around. And your company, your organization will become known for whether or not they extended a welcome or whether they were cold and fumbled it. So that's just phase one. Then you get to things like the job interview, whether or not your recruiters and your hiring managers have received training to know how to ask the appropriate questions or ask questions in the appropriate way. So that permeates throughout the entire organization. So it looks like we are at the end of our Q&A session, and I will hand it over to Jason to close us out.
All right. Well, don't actually have a script for that, but I'll do my best. We want to thank all of our sponsoring organizations, Centene Charitable Foundation, the Society for Human Resource Management, Emerson, and Nestle Purina for sponsoring our Workforce Workplace Disability Summit. I will give a plug for our StarCloth Workplace Advisors. If you have questions, if you'd like to learn more about our unique approach to helping businesses become more inclusive, feel free to reach out to us. You can connect with us at www.starcloth.org. That's www.starkloff.org. Our next Workforce Workplace Disability Summit webinar is going to be next Wednesday. We hope you're able to join us. Oh yes, and our SHRM codes. So your credit type is general. Again, for this you'll get 1.25 hours. Your HRCI credit code is ORG/program/535761. And your SHRM credit code is 20/W4FJG. And again, we will have this webinar up on our YouTube page in the next few days. So if you want to come back and watch it again, you'll have it available, and these will be available then. Did I forget anything, Lori?
Nope, you got it.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, StarCloth staff. Thank you, Lori. Have a great afternoon.